I want to kick it off with a quick question around what's the greatest seed that you see in DeSci for switching incentives in research, and how do you see it coming back? I think you talked to it a little bit in your talks, but I want to jump into that and then let people bubble a little bit on the questions they want to ask.
Yeah, so again, I'm not James, but for context here, I've worked with some DeSci projects for a little over 10 years now, developing some incentive structures, and I work with a couple projects now that are doing protocol developments for publishing largely. And then I also work in the open source community, which I'll be talking about later, which is very exciting, so stick around. So the deeper incentives, you spoke a little bit about this, you touched on it, and I have a question for you about it, but the deeper incentives in DeSci are what we're getting researchers to do. So your slide on 38% tax on publication, all this time that's spent on writing and not researching just seems like a huge waste. So how can we build a system that incentivizes researchers to not have to do that? It's a negative incentive. Incentivize them to do research and not writing. And then a second seed, is how do we get the public involved? Can we use crypto incentives and generative economics to get more people in the system? And I'll save my question for you later.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just comment on it real quick and say, I think one of the things that academics typically do is they're rigorous to a point of defensiveness. Like when you're writing papers, you have to preempt every possible thing someone could point out. And that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of heart and energy. So a lot of that time is them trying to say hey, I'm doing good science. You're not allowed to trust me, so I'm just going to prove it end to end. But one of the things we could do is help with incentives. So we always try to use carrots, not sticks with research hubs. So when we want people to do peer reviews, we're not hey, you got to do it because somebody else did it. We're hey, we're going to pay you to do it. And same thing with progress updates. So I think just providing better incentives and trying to give a structure that's beneficial for academics and fits into their workflow without forcing them to do other things can really help. But then the biggest seed I've seen is academics are very open-minded people. I think that might not be popular opinion, but they're open to new ideas. They just have to have the right framework to understand the idea. Because if it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to try it. But if it's transparent, it's well understood, and it leads to good science, in my experience, they do try cool things.
Brilliant. I want to take 30 seconds to have everybody think of what's the question in your mind, and then I'll open it up. I see you. Yeah, I'm going to wait 30 seconds so that everybody has a time to think, and then I'll open it up. The elevator music. All right, yeah, I'm going to pass you this.
Thank you. So just as a context, I've been in academia as a researcher, writing grants, and also been in pharma as an industry, and also being an entrepreneur, right? And my point is, writing the grant is not necessarily the most consuming part. You spend a lot of time as doing that, and kind of the money that is going to the universities somehow has some use, right, to support the infrastructure for the grants. I think what is more interesting or more important is how this new system, could actually change the incentives of data generation, result generation, how we can capture that, right? Because we write a grant, and the grant is something big that you want to write to do some experiment. But look, what happens is the experiment ended up being in a paper, right? But there is no real connection between the objective of the grant, the experiment run, and the very direct output of that experiment, right? And because it's so long, so if we can incentivize that process of this is the experiment that we are proposing, this is what we perform, this is the result, I think we actually will change a bit more the incentives, because the incentives right now is in the publication. The final publication is not the actual realization of the experiment. So if we can actually incentivize that with smaller grants, with smaller donations or things like that, actually that will change the benefit. And I guess, and to my final point, it will actually contribute quite a lot to AI decentralized science, because now we can think of data packages that agents can actually use later on, because that's what we don't have. Right now we are scrambling, going over the publications, trying to extract those data packages that were at some point there. wasn't not necessarily a question, but more like a comment.
So I just want to make sure, I think you just answered my question to you, but I just want to make sure. The output of the research endeavor, as you're describing, is not the publication, but it's the data set, the code, and the methodology.
It's that
Yeah.
data package
Yeah.
that you can associate between the experiment, the code of the experiment, the process of the experiment, and the result.
Yep.
We can actually capture that and incentivize that data generation with monetary incentives or something like that. That will change, therefore, as opposed to just packaging a paper that is just down the line being reviewed. That still could happen, but
Yeah.
right now it doesn't, right?
Yeah, there are a couple projects in the DeSci space that are working on that exact problem. It's the modularization of the research process. It's like you have a software engineer, you have a data steward or a data producer, you have someone who's thought of the hypothesis, you have someone who's developed a methodology. In our current system, they're all the same, it's a PI. And it's like, that's not how research actually happens. You have all these collaborative efforts. And if I can only work with the people in my lab as well, my physical lab, then I'm not I don't have access to the brilliant minds on the other side of the world who are creating data sets of their own and software of their own. So it's a really great challenge. And
The other piece that actually that incentivizes is the publication of negative results. Like right now, we don't as a community because the final publication is the paper.
yep.
If you incentivize the data generation, the data package of that, then you are incentivized to put like negative results.
Yeah, so some projects for you to look into. DeSci Labs is one that's working
We'll be
on
talking about that after lunch.
Bio is actually, I think, working on something similar to this or handling a problem. Is Research Hub doing anything in this world?
Yeah, we do. We haven't had a ton of people approach us with negative results, but we do want to publish them. And then I'll just say too, like the publication as the final outcome, it's the currency of academia. You know, like that's how you progress your career. So I think, yeah. But I think like what we can do is we can merge into the system and understand like that is their currency first, and then gradually work towards something better that's maybe not as like restrictive and has better outcomes. So I think just making sure like we keep them in mind for like the initial state, and then build off there to a better thing.
Sure, like if you complete the grant, like typically the grant you actually have stepwise, and you say like you have your publication, but if you actually publish the data that is going there, that's also.
So from the open source world, which is very traditional, there's a journal called JOSS, the Journal of Open Source Science, which recognized exactly what you said. Is like you need citations to advance right now, but we also recognize that's a little left up. For research software, you're writing code on GitHub, right? So what they did is they made it easy for people to get citable DOIs for their software, and it's changed the way that software is recognized as advanceable, career advancing credit a little bit. It's working towards it. But we can converge, and then eventually I think we really need to transition. Like, we need a different system. Citations should not be the incentive.
Cool.
It's a really good question, though.
Other questions? Yeah, I see you, Rick.
I can just be loud. Can you talk more about how the issue of anytime you introduce like a new incentive structure, there's this risk of it's lessening the whole as opposed to expanding it. And I'll give an example of that. All right, if your incentive structure, it might just reward the people that are already doing the research and then discourage the people who may otherwise want to be getting involved. So how do you avoid that problem? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a
you
great
alluded
question.
to it in your, but I want to hear more.
100%. So it's like, what are we optimizing for? So like two things that we try to optimize for. Number one is the reproducibility of the downstream research. So like, are we creating incentives that make bad science? Hopefully not. The reason why hopefully not is like we're trying to use pre-registrations, which is like the researcher lays out their full experimental plan ahead of time, and then before any experiments are done, we peer review it from experts in the field from any background. The idea is like before you do your experiments, get the feedback, and then do the experiments. That's one thing. The second thing is like, are we hurting their careers? We try not to take any requirements from the researcher, making sure everything's optional, whether they share updates, whether they publish with us if they want to. So I think just trying to like get out of the way, give the researcher the funds they need to do the stuff that they want to do. And then I think if there's any other limitations that come up, like the general mindset we have is like researchers are trustworthy people. They're going to do good research and they want to progress science. So just kind of like get out of their way if possible. Does that answer it?
One aspect. I'll give you one follow-up, which is, what about the issue of let's assume you specifically are very successful, and then the government saying, oh, we need to contribute less to it. Like, are you worried about that problem at all?
Yeah. So I guess, do you mean like really successful PIs versus non-successful researchers, or something different?
Or like, I'm only going to give to the top 5% of your group, right? And we're not gonna do the more distributed young researcher grants anymore because these guys are already identifying the best researchers. Or just simply, oh, these guys have already got like the research working, like the engine working, so we no longer need to contribute.
It's like
You-
Harvard doesn't need money.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you are basically, if you can bring so much money, would this give the government more excuse to not fund research?
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
I've seen this like we just saw it very publicly with like the whole Doge cuts thing. Then everyone's like, oh, we can just add $1 billion. Like, I mean, I don't want to be political about it, but like that kind of thinking occurs everywhere. So like, are you like,
You overestimate the government's understanding about what's happening.
right?
I think the government would not really know that much
Right.
about
Yeah.
what's happening.
I think.
You don't want to end up like someone's excuse for like just eliminating their fund, like eliminating what they're doing. Right?
Yeah, I think if Research Hub ends up like altering the NIH budget in any way, that's a massive success. But in general too, it's like we want to fund people across all levels. So if you're not an established professor, you can put up a $5,000 proposal, get your pilot study, and work your way to a bigger grant. And we've done that like with about 10 studies so far. So you should be able to like go through most of them. But last thing too is this is all like philanthropic donations. So my view of it is like we're providing a new source of funds for the basic science. There's like really cool stuff happening with IP, and I think the basic science, the value add is like you can take the pressure off of the system. So if the NIH has a certain budget, we're just adding a little more to the system to try and take the pressure off of those individuals without hopefully reducing the budget.
So to just quickly add to that, it's a great mindset because every time you incentivize one thing, you disincentivize another thing. But one of the most powerful things about Bitcoin, let alone all of crypto, like everything that started this movement, and bio is a great example of this, is it's open source. It gives anyone the ability to create their own incentive structure ever, like whenever they want. So it's not like we're trying to take away from NIH or distract from NIH. We're adding how many people in the world? 8 billion more minds to the ability to fund stuff. How would you fund research right now if you wanted to? You couldn't. With the infrastructure that DeSci is building, bio again, great example, you could start a DAO and you could see if the market likes your idea and get it funded. You're not dependent on NIH or other government funding.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I missed the first part, but I hope it's valuable. I was wondering if you guys are familiar with the quadratic funding formula as far as incentives. Maybe you guys touch on this again. Maybe I missed it, but I think it's a great model that we can implement in these efforts for decentralized science a lot more. And just for context to everybody, the quadratic funding formula, it was created by Vitalik, and it has been given, at least on the thesis of regenerative finance, it has been given more than $80 million to projects on regeneration all over the world. So I was wondering, like, if you guys can talk a little bit more about how can this be applied for research and the science, and if you guys want to explain it, or I can explain it, but I think it's great to create the awareness that this exists and we can use it. Like, it's a tremendous incentive mechanism.
To hypersimplify quadratic funding, it pairs the number of people that like a thing with the amount of money that goes behind a thing to come up with a solution of, come up with an ordered list of what's most popular. It's much more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. And it's a good formula. I think there are thousands more that should be applied. Quadratic funding could be applied in one funding model for one DAO, maybe a different model for another one. Maybe we can use generative economics, maybe like, every 5% of all blockchains emissions should go to basic research, something like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity in crypto because we're redefining how economics works from the ground up. And I think quadratic funding is a great example of one.
Yeah, so if you have 10 people donating $10, you get $100. So with the DAO that I've been working, you get match another 100 for a total of 200. This is just an example. But if you get 100 people donating $1, you get the same $100, but you unlock the quadratic funding formula, so you will be matched 10x or 100x from the DAO, and so this is like the quadratic funding formula for.
Yeah.
I'd love for us researchers to use this in
Yeah, I'll
create
just
more
quickly
incentives.
comment. I think it's an algorithmic way of allocating matching funds. So like if you have a pool of money that you want to allocate in some programmatic way and you don't want to have individual control over where it goes, it's a phenomenal way to distribute it to the community. I think if you have a private group of funders who want to allocate to a specific like location, you wouldn't necessarily want to use programmatic like algorithmic funding, but for distributing matching funds, 100%. I think we should totally do it that way.
I have a question regarding what you just discussed about the crowd. One thing that I have realized is that a lot of these people who are paying attention to all the DAOs are not really people who really need the help. Like, for example, I think one of the examples would be all the orphan drugs that needed to be recognized by the FDAs, but then all the group of users who are the patients that own probably like 100 out of 1 billion people that has the diseases are not being known and recognized. Most of the people that are actually buying the tokens and whatnot are still the people that just want to make money out of that. How do you think that we can solve the problem of attracting the right attention? Because I think that's they actually have the people that have the stories are very important to attract the emotions of the crowd. But I don't think that the current crypto world is doing that. I think we're all talking about just money, 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 including the people. I just come back from Wall Street. Everyone just talk about, well, yeah, there's definitely money there. All we want is to make money.
There's DeSci is a double-edged sword. So it brings great stuff to Web3 because Web3 is a lot of money, 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 and DeSci is one of the most tangible public good outcomes of blockchain technology. But at the same time, we still have a marketing problem where we are very much money, money, money. Some of the incentive programs and incentive protocols that exist right now can kind of solve this. For example, I work with a project called Gridcoin that does distributed computing, where hundreds of thousands of people contribute their processing power from their laptops and phones to do science, and they get cryptocurrencies for that work. The peer review systems and things like Research Hub are also ways to get more people involved, but the more accessible we can make it, the people affected by these diseases do have phones and computers. Let them participate in the research process directly by giving them the means to do so, and maybe then their stories will be part of our stories. But it's largely a marketing problem from my perspective. We need to stop talking about money so much.
It's important, though.
It is.
I'll just say I agree. Like I think part of the things that they can do is shine the spotlight brighter on their problem and engage. Like unfortunately, money is like the way that we will get research done. So that is like part of the optimization problem for those individuals. Like they have to get somebody to allocate funds to it to get the problem solved. So I think shining the spotlight, talking about it, doing peer reviews on it if it's your subject expertise. And then even people have done this in the past, but like you write review papers on the state of a field and you're like, hey, this is the problem we're having right now. We need more researchers doing it, like a call to action kind of thing.
Cool. I'm going to take a moment before our last question to let anybody who's not used to raising their hand think about raising their hand. And then I will go to whoever raises their hand. All right, any last question?
Someone else has a question. If anyone wants to talk about that question in particular later, please find me, because I think that is one of the core problems we have. It keeps academics out and it keeps the public out, it keeps regulators out. It's a big problem.
Hi there. So, quick question about strategies to bridge the gap between traditional academic researchers and the general public and DeSci platforms. Like what we're seeing a lot in the space is two barriers. One, the steep learning curve of Web3 tools and the skepticism many scientists have about crypto-based systems and tooling. So if you could expand a little bit on that, would be great.
Yeah. So at Research Hub, we try to take the complexity away from it. Like we use a lot of modern tools that require crypto, like Research Coin and the funding mechanisms, and it makes stuff go a lot faster. But we've had really a lot of struggles, to be honest, with people onboarding, whether they're like funders or if they're academics. Like in the beginning, Research Hub, we were paying $150 in tokens for peer reviews. That was so hard to get to like the person's bank account. Like they'd have to go through a $40 fee on Ethereum and then make a Coinbase app. And they're like, what is this thing? I would spend hours on the phone with these guys. So like nowadays we tried to abstract it where like since Research Coin is listed on Coinbase, they could take it right from the app to Coinbase and sell it to cash. And I think there's still multiple steps people have to go through to do it, but like over time we should just whittle away the steps between like click the button, get the outcome you want, whether it's like onboarding or offboarding. But yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, I think there's a great solution to this. There's So that's kind of at the application layer. There's then the infrastructure layer, which we were kind of talking about a little bit with the modular rewards. Like, how does data storage look with crypto, with blockchain? Get tokens out of it. Just how do we store data in a distributed way? How do we do compute over data? How do we reward people for performing these actions in research that are really important? And these are really deep questions that are starting to get a little more recognition, particularly over the last year, year and a half, because people are starting to see what happens when you have a single point of failure in a system where data is stored, where websites are hosted, where software exists. And if that source goes away, everything on there goes away. So people are like, oh, how can we build distributed systems? Well, blockchain's been around for 15 years figuring this out, and more people are starting to pay attention to that. So if we can speak to that infrastructure level, to academics, as well as making it very easy for them to interact at the application level, I think we'll have a much better time marketing to people who we really need in this space. So we're not just a bunch of financiers, we're more academics.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. One last round of applause for our speakers here.